As Lily stood in the darkened kitchen, her hand clutching the counter for balance, the rain pattered softly against the window. Jake was leaning nonchalantly against the refrigerator across from her, his gaze dark and impenetrable. Her voice trembled as she murmured, "You know this is wrong." Jake took a step forward, his presence commanding. Then, in a calm, low voice, he whispered, "Tell me to go." As the distance between them disappeared and her words were stuck in her throat, her heart raced. Family reunions had always been chaotic in Lily's world, between distant relatives catching up and everyone vying for their grandmother's attention. The house was filled with laughter, stories, and a touch of drama. But this year, something felt different. Jake, her cousin from out of state, hadn't attended a reunion in years. His unexpected arrival caused a stir, partly because of his striking presence and partly because he seemed to have changed. Jake was no longer the awkward teenager Lily remembered. He was confident, sharp, and effortlessly charismatic. Lily had always seen Jake as nothing more than a family member, but as the weekend unfolded, she found herself noticing things about him she hadn't before. The way he carried himself, the way his gaze lingered on her just a second too long, it all left her feeling off balance. That evening, after most of the family had gone to bed, Lily wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, the laughter and chaos of the day giving way to a serene stillness. To her surprise, Jake was already there, leaning against the counter with a beer in hand. He looked up as she entered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice soft. "Too much noise in my head," she replied, grabbing a glass from the cupboard. "Same," he said, watching her as she poured herself a drink. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. Lily felt his gaze on her, and her pulse quickened. "It's been a while since we've really talked," Jake said, breaking the silence. "It has," she agreed, turning to face him. "You disappeared for a long time." "Life got busy," he said with a shrug. "But I missed this. Family. You." His words caught her off guard, and she struggled to find a response. "It's good to have you back," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. The air between them felt heavier as they fell into an easy conversation, reminiscing about childhood memories and catching up on lost time. But as the minutes passed, the mood shifted. Jake's compliments became more personal, his gaze more intense. "You've changed, Lily," he said, his tone serious. "So have you," she replied, her cheeks flushing. He took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking. "It's a good thing," he murmured, his voice low. Lily's breath hitched as she looked up at him, her heart racing. "Jake." He reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice steady. "And I will." The words were on the tip of her tongue, but they wouldn't come. Instead, she stood frozen as he leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was tentative but filled with unspoken emotions. Her hands found his chest, her touch hesitant but growing bolder as the kiss deepened. Jake's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer as they gave in to the connection that had been simmering between them all night. "This is crazy," she murmured against his lips, her voice trembling. "Maybe," he replied, his breath warm against her skin. "But it feels right." The kitchen, once a mundane space, became their sanctuary as they explored the boundaries of their connection, their whispered words and hurried breaths filling the quiet night. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Lily stirred, the weight of the previous night pressing heavily on her chest. She glanced at Jake, who was already awake, his expression unreadable. "We shouldn't have done that," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I know," he replied, his tone filled with regret. "But I don't regret it." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Their grandmother's voice called out, cheerful and unsuspecting. "Good morning, you two. Breakfast is ready." Lily's stomach churned as Jake stood, his jaw tightening. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice firm. She nodded, her heart heavy as they prepared to face the day, their secret looming over them like a storm cloud. The day unfolded uneventfully, but the tension between them was palpable. As they gathered with the family for dinner, Lily caught Jake's eye from across the room. His gaze held hers, a silent reminder of what they had shared. But just as she thought they had escaped unnoticed, her aunt's voice broke through the chatter. You two seemed awfully cozy last night, she said, her tone light but pointed. Lily's heart stopped, her cheeks flushing as the room fell silent. Jake's hand brushed hers under the table, a quiet reassurance that they were in this together. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Lily's aunt's words hung in the air. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to deflect the attention. We were just catching up, she said quickly, forcing a smile. It's been years since we've really talked. Her aunt raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued, but before she could press further, their grandmother chimed in. It's good to see family reconnecting, she said warmly. That's what these reunions are for. The conversation shifted, the tension easing, but Lily could still feel the weight of Jake's gaze from across the table. Her cheeks burned as she avoided looking at him, afraid her expression would give away everything. Later that evening, as the family dispersed to their rooms, Lily lingered in the living room, pretending to read. She couldn't face Jake yet, not with the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. But she didn't have to wait long. Jake appeared in the doorway, his presence commanding even in the dim light. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, his voice steady but laced with urgency. She hesitated, her heart pounding, but finally nodded. "Not here," she whispered, glancing toward the hallway where the others were sleeping. He gestured for her to follow, leading her out to the back porch. The cool night air brushed against her skin, grounding her as they stood in silence for a moment. "What are we doing, Jake?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on her. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I can't stop thinking about you." Her chest tightened as his words sank in. "This is insane. We're family." "We're not really family," he said, his tone firm. "Not in the way that matters. We're just two people who happen to grow up apart, and now... this." Lily looked away, her thoughts a tangled mess. "But what happens if someone finds out? What happens to us, to the family?" Jake stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "I don't have all the answers," he said softly. "But I know that what I feel for you isn't going away, and I don't think you want it to." Her breath hitched as his words struck a chord deep within her. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was undeniable. "Jake," she began, her voice breaking. "I'm scared." He reached out, cupping her face gently. "Me too," he admitted, his gaze steady. "But that doesn't change how I feel about you." Before she could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken longing. Lily froze for a moment, her mind screaming at her to stop, but her body betrayed her, leaning into him instead. The kiss deepened, their emotions spilling over as they gave in to the connection they had been trying to suppress. Jake's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer as Lily's fingers tangled in his hair. "This is crazy," she murmured against his lips, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and desire. "I know," he replied, his breath warm against her skin, "but it feels right." The quiet night wrapped around them like a cocoon, shielding them from the world as they lost themselves in each other. As they pulled apart, breathless and overwhelmed, the sound of the back door creaking open shattered the moment. Lily's heart stopped as she turned to see her grandmother standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What's going on out here?" her grandmother asked, her tone soft but probing. Jake stepped forward quickly, his voice calm. "We were just talking, Grandma," he said smoothly. Her grandmother's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze shifting between them. "It's late," she said finally. "You both should get some rest." Lily nodded quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Good night, Grandma," she said, her voice trembling. As her grandmother disappeared back inside, Lily turned to Jake, her chest tightening. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered urgently. Jake reached for her hand, his grip steady. "I'm not giving up on this, Lily. On us, no matter what." The next day, the house buzzed with activity as the family prepared for their farewell brunch. Lily avoided Jake as much as possible, her heart heavy with the weight of their secret. But every time their eyes met, the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. As the family gathered around the table, Lily's aunt made another pointed comment. "You two seem awfully close lately," she said with a sly smile. Lily's stomach dropped, her cheeks burning, but before she could respond, Jake spoke up, his tone light but firm. "We're just making up for lost time," he said smoothly. The conversation moved on. but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that their secret was teetering on the edge of discovery. As the family said their goodbyes, Jake pulled Lily aside, his expression serious. "This isn't over," he said softly. She nodded, her heart heavy. "I know." Whatever the future held, they would have to face it together, no matter how complicated it got. As the family said their goodbyes after the brunch, the air was thick with tension. Lily tried to avoid Jake, knowing every stolen glance carried a dangerous weight. But as her relatives began filing out, he caught her wrist in a firm but gentle grip. "Meet me in the guest house," he whispered, his voice low, his eyes locked on hers. Her pulse quickened, but she nodded almost imperceptibly, her body betraying her better judgment. Lily waited until the last of the cars pulled away before slipping out the back door and making her way to the small guest house at the edge of the property. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, the door creaking softly behind her. Jake was already there, standing by the window, his hands in his pockets. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. "This is the last time," she said quickly, though her voice wavered. Jake stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Don't lie to yourself, Lily," he murmured. "You know this isn't something we can just walk away from." Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, his hand sliding to her waist as he pulled her against him. His lips found hers, the kiss urgent and filled with the pent-up emotions they had been suppressing for weeks. Lily's resolve crumbled as she gave in, her fingers tangling in his hair as the kiss deepened. Jake guided her to the small couch, his movements deliberate yet tender, as if he wanted to memorize every moment. "You're impossible," she whispered against his lips, her breath hitching. "And you're irresistible," he replied, his voice thick with desire. The small guest house seemed to shrink around them as they surrendered completely, their connection undeniable. Every touch, every whispered word carried the weight of their forbidden bond, the quiet of the house amplifying the sounds of their passion. As they lay entwined on the couch, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the stillness. Lily's eyes widened in panic as she sat up, quickly straightening her clothes. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake stood, his jaw tightening. "Stay calm," he said, his tone steady. The door opened, and their grandmother stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Her gaze lingered on Lily's flushed cheeks and Jake's rumpled appearance. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. Lily's heart pounded, her mind racing for an explanation, but Jake stepped forward, his tone calm and firm. "We were just talking," he said smoothly. "Catching up." Their grandmother's eyes flicked between them, suspicion evident. But after a moment, she sighed. "It's time to help clean up," she said finally. "Don't take too long." As the door closed behind her, Lily let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. "This has to stop," she whispered, turning to Jake. He cupped her face, his gaze steady. "Maybe it does," he said softly, "but not today.